This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What the hell is going on?
What's really going on?
We said, what the hell happened?
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
They see what's going on. I don't know what's going on. What is going on?
We must find out what is going on.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? The unusual good news version. Mark, what are we talking about today?
What the hell is going on is we're hearing a lot of, if you doom scroll Instagram and other places, you're seeing all these videos talking about how, oh, you know what, it's so hard, from Gen Z folks, it's so hard to get ahead these days. You can't afford a home. Used to be you could, have a home and pay for college and everything on a single income, and our life is so bad. And actually, if you dig down into the data, it is not true. Actually, Gen Z is wealthier than we were, boomers and Gen X. I'm Gen X, you're a boomer. I just discovered on this podcast.
Let's lead with that, shall we?
Yes, let's lead with that. So, okay, boomer, but they're actually better off than we were when they were young. Almost everything is better for them. Their incomes are higher. They have more wealth accumulated in their 20s than we did. There are more people who can afford houses and who have houses. The houses are bigger. Part of the problem is that everyone's expecting to live in a 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage and all the rest of it. The previous generations, they lived in small, modest little houses if they owned houses, and fewer people did. More people are graduating from college. More people graduating from high school. They have more stuff. Life is better for this generation than any generation in human history, and that's not. And we have a great guest, an economist from the Cato Institute who studies this and who's going to back that up with facts. So it's not just you and me waving, old woman waving a fist at the clouds. It's actually facts and data that show that this is actually true.
I will say, and we spend a lot of time dunking on Gen Z and Gen Alpha in the podcast, and rightly so, for being fundamentally ignorant of their own financial and economic reality. But I do remember when I finished college and I was putting what we used to call ding letters. Remember when you didn't get a job that you applied for because you saw it in the newspaper? We would put ding letters up on our doors and post them all when I was in college and a senior. But I remember feeling like I'm never going to be able to do what my parents did. And like you, right? My parents came out of the Holocaust. Your mother came out of the Warsaw Uprising. Damn. The idea that we thought we weren't going to do as well as them.
Boy, they had it better than we did.
and this is what's so absolutely remarkable, right? Is that, and I hear this from my kids too. And there's no question we live a good life. But the reality is that when I was that age, I didn't go overseas all the time. I didn't stay in nice hotels all the time. I mean, I remember finding a fingernail on my bed when I was staying somewhere with following a friend of mine. That was the high quality of the hotel I stayed in. So, I mean, I think these are sort of universal perceptions at a certain age. I worry, as you suggest kind of late in our podcast, that social media deepens this perception and makes it into a reality. As John Haidt says, right? This is the anxious generation, and they like being anxious.
Or they just can't help being anxious. But I mean, we were all anxious, because you were supported by your parents, and then to some extent through high school or through college. Maybe a lot of people had jobs in college to help them get through. And then you go off into the world, and you've got to make it on your own, and that's always scary, and it's a transition, and all of a sudden, like, stuff that you took for granted in life that your parents provided you, all of a sudden you got to provide for yourself, and you realize how expensive it is, and it's not that easy, and you can't have it all. I mean, when I first was graduated from college, I had 3 roommates. I had a job in a political consulting firm, and I worked a second job at a pizza joint, waiting tables to try and pay my rent. and that was normal. And I couldn't, order out food, and I couldn't do a lot of things that people have now. And I think there's just this expectation that you're going to, live like your parents, could just continue your life the way it was, that the life your parents provided you, and you're just going to seamlessly transition to that. And that's not how it works. Your parents spent, 40, 50 years of their lives building to that point where they could provide you for all those things. And now you've got to build all that up. But you've got better opportunities than most of us did, and certainly than your grandparents did, to do that. And just you can't expect to, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to get Starbucks every day when you're first starting out. You're going to have to actually make coffee at home. Go to, and maybe you can't have DoorDash. You have to actually go to the grocery store and make something at home. These are adjustments you have to make.
But these are such first world problems too. I mean, you're completely
Yes.
right. Like your kids, our kids were home over Thanksgiving, and we actually talked a lot about this. And our one daughter who's still in college, Nikki, she was talking about the fact that Nikki cooks for herself, and she's a very good cook, so that's wonderful. But that
Inherited
she
that from
knows
you.
actually lots and lots and lots of people who DoorDash or Uber Eats almost every day. I don't ever do that. I can remember the last time I did it because it was 10 months ago, and I was really sick and by myself at home, and I was horrified by how much it cost and how little food I got. And yet a lot of kids nowadays have these first world problems, which is, I can't afford to Uber Eats every day or once a week. And even further than that when you and I were young, this prosperity that we enjoy in America was different, right? I didn't go with my friends to coffee shops. I mean, I did go with my friends out for pizza after school, like once or twice a week. But I mean, we all shared a pizza, and, I probably spent $2. Now, of course, you go to Starbucks and it's $10 easy. So, I think there's a failure to understand that actually the anxiety that they have is a product of good times, not bad times, right? We're not at war. The Vietnam War is not, on. The draft is not on. The Cold
Holocaust
War
is
is
not
not on.
The Holocaust is not on.
Yes. Also true, which was really a damper.
Well, the
on...
anti-Semitism is still there, as we've well documented on this podcast. But I wanted to give people just a little bit of a perspective, because I ask our guest a question, which I will let him answer, but I have my own answer to it, which is, if you were a 20-something and you could be born at any point in human history, starting at the dawn of agricultural civilization 30,000 years ago till 2025, would you choose any other time but 2025 to be born? And if your answer is yes, I'd choose another time, you're insane. Because this is the best time in human history to be alive, and particularly to be alive as an American. And 8 years ago, I found this column that George Will wrote 8 years ago, and it's really fascinating. He basically says that the good news is, this was 8 years ago, you're as rich as John D. Rockefeller if you're alive today. Actually, you're richer. He was one of America's first billionaires. And if you think about his life, yes, he had a beautiful mansion on Fifth Avenue. He had a beautiful mansion on the Pacific Coast. He had a private railroad car to take him from place to place. But you know what? He didn't have air conditioning. There was no, ability to pick up the phone and call from someone on the East Coast or the West Coast in the way there is today. There were no phonograph records. There was no radio in the way that we have it. There were no antibiotics. There was no modern pharmacology. There was no, if you had arthritic hips or knees, there was no hip replacements or knee replacements you could have. If you had a toothache, guess what? You're just going to have your tooth pulled without Novocaine. There was no Netflix. There was no Google. There was no, all these things. If you just look at the average life expectancy back then, all the rest of it, that the life is so much better for the average person at 25 today than it was for John D. Rockefeller in 1916. So if you think of yourself as the John D. Rockefellers of the 21st century, you're probably right. And you should be grateful that you're living right now.
Yeah.
For
So
all the
let's
problems.
let all of the John D. Rockefellers out there listen to the actual numbers behind this from our guest. Norbert Michel is the vice president and director of the Cato Institute Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives. He specializes in financial markets and monetary policy. Previously, he was the director for data analysis at the Heritage Foundation. He's the author of the book Crushing Capitalism: How the Stagnation Narrative is Threatening the American Dream. And let's underscore that word there, narrative, because I think we really get a sense that there's more narrative than fact here.
Here's our interview. Norbert, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
We're so glad to have you here. So, there's a lot of hand-wringing in Gen Z today that, oh my gosh, things were so much better in the 50s and 60s, and our parents' generation, they had these, they could afford a home on a single income, and their lives were so much better than us, and woe is us, and all the rest of it. And you say that's not exactly right. Can you just give us the 30-foot, 1,000-foot view as to how their lives compare to their parents and grandparents?
Yes, sure. So they're wrong. We always do this nostalgic thing, I think, where we think things used to be better, and okay, that's fine, but it's just not true. The statistics bear it out. We've earned higher and higher income. The only sense that the middle class has shrunken is that it's gotten richer. If you were to put an objective sort of set of guardrails around it, we've escaped those guardrails by going up. And
so the middle class is smaller because people have graduated up from it, not down.
That's right. That's the only way that you could say that it shrunk. We've had triple growth from the middle income, literally three times growth in the middle of that segment. If you look at median household income, for all families, basically what you see there is 73%, I believe 73% real growth. And or all households rather, 73% growth from 1968 to 2024. And if you do that for married couples with children, the increase is 132%. And the retort that I usually get with that is, oh yeah, but you can't buy a house. But that's also not true. If you adjust houses for size and the number of people living in them, the cost, the household cost, the cost of living in a house, mortgage included or rent included, as a percentage of income, is very flat over that period from 1970 to now. It's only fluctuated a few percentage points, and it's almost exactly where it was in 1970. And we spend a slightly smaller share on food, clothing, and housing combined than we did in 1970. So it's not the same.
So I assume we're all Gen X, right?
Yes, I am.
Yes, I am too. Okay, so is
Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm a boomer.
You're a boomer. Okay, boomer. So anyway.
Remember, Norbert, when I said sometimes I swear?
I now have a new insult I can throw Danny's way. Awesome. That's so good to know.
Thank you.
But here, excluding Danny, who's a boomer, is Gen Z wealthier at their age than we were at their age now?
So there are some statistics that suggest that is the case, yes. Wealth is a little... The data, U.S. wealth data, is a little trickier to parse out. But yeah, in general, that's true. And if you figure in parents' wealth for younger people, then yes, that's also true. So yeah, we've never had a wealthier group of people on the planet than what we have now. And of course,
to be upset about.
Things could be better. That's true. I mean, if people look at high healthcare costs, high education costs, that's a thing that I think drives a lot of this. And those are some real policy questions to have, to parse out and say, well, what's wrong with those areas, right? And there's a lot there. But 1970, roughly half the workforce hadn't graduated high school. That's unheard of now. Only about 5% had a college education. That's unheard of now. So we have to keep all those things in perspective and just right, because the truth is we have earned more income and we have built more wealth. We have gotten wealthier than we have ever been.
So now I come back. older woman that I am, perception is important, however. So Norbert,
Sure.
you've given us reality, right? And then there's perception. So there's the Harvard poll of Gen Z. And I think probably unsurprisingly to all of us who have kids, work with younger people, know Gen Z and even Gen Alpha, this poll of youth by Harvard University finds that you are completely wrong, at least in the minds of these young people, right? They
Oh
feel
yeah. Yeah.
profound anxiety, a word that they adore,
Yeah.
we should say. More than 4 in 10 of them in this Harvard Youth poll say they're struggling to get by with only limited financial security. They cite exactly what you talked about, although they add student debt, which I'm not unsympathetic towards. Now, again, perception, but this guy should know better. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, agrees, right? Said kids coming out of college and younger people, minorities are having a hard time finding jobs. Okay. So, how do we reconcile this generational angst with the facts that you're laying out? Or is this just always a thing?
Well, that's the good question at the end there. I'm not so sure it's not always a thing, because I know that in my generation, when I got out of college, undergrad, I know a lot of my friends felt that way. To some extent I did. And I don't know that I can compare it exactly to now, but I know that there was a lot of that. You become an adult, so to speak. You're on your own. You probably will have some anxiety. So I think that's a thing. And I also do think, though, that part of it is also that we have been doing so well. My son, who is in his low 20s, we tried not to spoil, but really especially compared to my life growing up, didn't need anything else. We had no trouble getting him a used car. That wasn't a big thing. That was easy enough to do. All of his friends had whatever they needed. Like there was plenty to go around. There's a lot of toys, a lot of games, a lot of everything, right? And I think that, to some extent, when you come out of that environment and it's like, okay, now you're going to have to do this on your own, you probably have somewhat of a realization of, oh, wow, I had a lot of stuff and now I have to buy it. And, like you for the first time you start buying dinner and buying groceries and you've never had to do that, and it's a bit of a shock. So I think some of those things are explained by those phenomena, and we always tend to believe that lots of surveys show this, even outside of this generation, humans, we just tend to believe that everybody else is doing bad. Like we're not doing that badly, but oh god, everybody else is having such a hard time,
No,
which is
exactly.
unfair and unrealistic. But that's what we do. And maybe I'm missing something too.
I mean, certainly we of Gen X and Boomers are always missing something in the view of younger generations, but I suspect that our parents and grandparents also felt that way. But there is one thing that resonates with me, and I'm not sure about it factually, actually, which is student debt. We've had, a few kids in college. They're done, thank God. Mark is the same, but when I went to college, it was $8,000 a year. When my husband went, it was to a state school, it was less than $2,000 a year. I'm now paying $85,000 for my daughter to go to Vanderbilt. In case you're listening, Daniel Dermeyer, that's really a lot. Is the perception about the burden of student debt correct?
Well, we certainly have more of it now. So in that sense, yes. And I'm a former professor, a college professor, and I understand why everybody goes to college. I do. Everybody, meaning many, many more people. But I think that we've kind of lost what we're doing there a little bit. I think everybody thinks that they absolutely positively have to, and not enough people who go in actually stop and think about what they're doing, because we've made it so easy to get the tuition, to borrow the money, to get the tuition, to go wherever we want and to study whatever we want, even when it's very likely and very obvious in some cases that we're about to borrow a lot of money to pay for a degree that probably won't make that kind of return, that we used to see. And it seems to me that not enough people are having those conversations, with their children. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but I know my experience as an undergrad professor, it certainly seemed to me that there was not enough thought being put into all of those decisions.
I want to get into the perceptions and why young people feel this way, but I'd like to lay down a predicate with a few more facts here. So, one of the things is they say you can't own a house. It's too expensive to own a house. There's more home ownership now than there was in the 50s, right? The houses are bigger. They've got, 2-car garages, and they've got more bedrooms and more square footage. They've got more amenities. Everybody has air conditioning. Now, in the 50s, people didn't have air conditioning. You want to go across country to see your friend in California, you can do it on go on Southwest for $200 and something round trip today. It was like $1,000 trip, a couple decades ago. So many things are better and more accessible. Am I wrong? Is there, walk us through some of how these things work?
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of these things are dead on. I mean, again, like Generation X, you didn't just fly everywhere. You would do vacation, but your vacation would be probably a long trip in a car with everybody else. And, it was not easy to get by. And that the idea that it was is wrong. And the amenities that we have now are plentiful, comparatively speaking. You mentioned the ones in housing, iPhones, computers, the safety features in the cars that we drive, all of these sorts of things that, some of them didn't even exist, much less be available to pretty much everybody. I don't know. I think that is also sort of a contributing factor. Everybody's used to these things. And over the last 5 decades, the home ownership rate is just about where it was before. So in the mid 60s. 60%, but we've got another 100 million people here. That's a lot more people that are owning, and you still have about a third renting. And there's nothing wrong with renting. We've also created this perception that you have to own and that it's bad to rent. And economically, in an objective sense, that's not right. And if we try to tilt our government policy so that you are a 20-year-old who gets out of high school and has no trouble affording and buying a house, we're probably going to run into some trouble. That's probably not what we want to be shooting for. Even though everybody seems to want everything now, we would probably have some very negative consequences from that.
So there are, I will say, something you said in response to my previous question has stuck with me, right? Which is this sort of unexpectedness of being a grown-up, which is absolutely, I'm sure consistent, and probably was the case in ancient Egypt, where, kids came home and were like, oh my God, I didn't realize I had to buy my own goat. Sorry, I'm making myself laugh now. But
It's okay.
There are, I will say, when I became a grown-up, I had to pay my own rent, which was a big deal, and pay my own taxes and things like that. I did not have the unbelievable cost of living of incidentals that exist now. Now, again, these are all nice to haves, right? A cell phone, of course, they've become entitlements in today's America, but, cable TV, cell phones, all of those things are, the cost of living feels, even to me, who's sort of, lived through this, like it is much higher. Is that also a false perception? Have these just substituted for other things like your home phone bill and, is electricity cheaper? Help us think about the global burden on individuals.
Yeah, no, I mean, the data is really clear. It has come down worldwide, countrywide, most countries, especially in the United States. And some of I think some of the psychology might be related to the pandemic and the jump in inflation that we had right there. And then everybody thinks, oh, well, the price level didn't come back down, which is true. But that would probably be even worse if we did try to drive it back down and deflate to that extent. But I do think that has something to do with it. And we have seen lately a very bumpy inflation series. You know, with the tariff stuff on and off again, we've seen a lot of inflation, as in much higher, a good bit higher than what we've been used to prior to the pandemic. So that's real. But over the long term, it's just factually correct that the cost of living has come down dramatically. The amount of time we have to work to afford almost all of the products that we buy has come down. You know, if we do a work hour sort of analysis, it's easier. We're more productive. We can make stuff with fewer people. And as a share of our income, most of the things that we buy, most of the pieces of our budget have come down. We didn't get wealthier because somebody just showered something upon us, right? It was
Well,
the
they did
jobs
in a way,
that we're doing
during COVID at least.
Well, okay, yes, that's an exception, yes. but we've been getting better and better high-paying jobs throughout the economy, even at the lower end of the distribution. You've seen a lot of growth over the last few decades. So it's really, really, really difficult, and you really have to cherry pick and dig to find data to support that it's become harder to live and harder to get by, and that the cost of living hasn't come down dramatically, because it has.
So you mentioned COVID, which I think is the first time we've brought this up, and I do see, and again, this is only my perception, COVID is a huge inflection point, culturally and work-wise. I mean, what we see now, although these were trends before COVID, is that more and more young people live with their parents. Right? More and more young people work remotely. And of course, paradoxically, despite, the fact that they're getting paid the same, but getting to live wherever they want, they're mooching off their parents, that isolation that has resulted in that generation probably deepens this perception that they are so much worse off than their families. I mean, what do you think about that? And why is it then that perceptions of costs, at least, are prompting so many kids to live with their families well into their mid and even late 20s?
Well, I mean, I do think that has something to do with it. I think COVID was sort of disastrous for those kids right at the end of high school and or right in the middle of college. I think psychologically and economically, it was just a mess. Regrettably, I think a mistake we could have avoided, but nonetheless, it happened. And I do think there's a lot of holdover from that. Those are very formative years that we did that to those guys, to those people. But also, I don't have stats on this, and I looked for it, and I couldn't find stats that I was happy with. But I know that this used to happen. I mean, like my parents told me about it, and then some of my friends when I was in college and out of college, it happened where they moved back with their parents for a while to save up money for a house or something, even a house with another friend. Like that they would go in on, and like, so it's not that stuff has never happened before, and it actually used to be quite common. A lot of families would cohabitate again. The children would move off, and then they would come back to take care of the elder parents later on, or the grandparents later on, and I kind of get it, but I also kind of don't see the problem.
I guess, you hit on something earlier about how it's, the shock of becoming an adult. Is it because, in part, that young people today grew up in such affluence comparable to their predecessors? They had the Netflix at home. They had cell phones. They had iPhones. They had all these things. Their parents would pay their Starbucks bill, and then all of a sudden you're supporting yourself, and your expectations are, I can have Starbucks every day. And
right.
And I'm going to live in a nice house like my parents do with granite counters. And and I see all these people on social media living in these great lives. Like when I first graduated, I had 3 roommates, and I was living. Right. And my wife was living on a futon in the dining room in an apartment because there weren't enough bedrooms for them. It's like they expect to. It's almost like they expect to just continue the lives that their parents gave them.
That's right.
On their own.
That's right.
with,
No, that's
with their
right.
own incomes and are shocked to find out that they can't afford it because their parents spent 50 years building up to that. Right?
No, that's right. No, that's right. And I was an older parent when I became a parent, and my children, they were able to have their own bedrooms. I shared a room with my brother until I was 20, and he moved out. So I really do think that has that is a big part of it. It's much easier, to get. Well, no, I shouldn't even say easier. Like it's easy to give my child a $5 coffee or whatever it is at Starbucks. I didn't have that opportunity.
Yep.
It just wasn't the same in terms of opportunities, literally in terms of choices, literally in terms of consumer products. And you can't have it both ways, right? If you think that all of those things are good and you want to have all those things, okay, well, now you do. So, just the fact that it's not all free doesn't mean that it's harder and doesn't mean that life's a bitch.
And then you die.
Life was probably a bitch already,
No, for sure. You had another piece that I really like a lot, talking about the middle class, because I do think that in addition to perception, politics also plays an enormous role here, right? The rise of populism means that this narrative that everything sucks for the little man, right, is actually hugely popular. And of course we have, it's not just Donald Trump telling us that, it's also Bernie Sanders. Right, it's also Mamdani. It's no political party has a monopoly on this narrative. But in this piece that you wrote about the middle class, some of the stats just are stunning to me about, for example, the productivity of the American worker. So between 1962 and 2024, men between ages of 25 and 44 saw real income growth, right? So not nominal, of 45%. And then we go further. Manufacturing, right? It's not the case, you say, that reliance on manufacturing jobs started tanking with increased trade in the 70s and the 80s. Actually, the share of manufacturing and employment in the United States has been on decline since World War II. But productivity, this number, really incredible. U.S. manufacturers produce more with fewer people. In 1950, real manufacturing output per worker was 19,500. By 2011, it was 156,500. Okay, so all of these stats and tons and tons and tons more. A typical worker in 1947 produced in 10 hours what a typical worker today produces in an hour. So, okay, it's not just Gen Z and Gen Alpha that think life sucks and they'll never be able to afford anything and they'll never be able to have the life their parents have. Our politicians are also telling us that life sucks and that nobody will ever be able to have the lives their parents have. Where does this come from? And just talk a little bit about this misperception.
Sure. This one,
it's a hard question.
I find this one so interesting because in one way it frustrates me that this isn't new. In another way, it kind of gives me a little bit of comfort that this isn't new. But this is straight out of the Pat Buchanan playbook, really straight out of the William Jennings Bryan playbook in the late 1800s. I mean, like this is the same crap over and over again, right? Just with more numbers and more examples. They play on people's fears, and is it so? Like the Rust Belt's a great example. Is it true that some of those manufacturing facilities closed and never reopened, and there's fewer people in some of those little small towns in the Rust Belt area? Absolutely. But that didn't just start happening in 1970, 1980, or 2001. This sort of thing's been going on for over a century. And what they don't tell you is that a lot of those job losses and manufacturing losses were offset by ones in the South. So the data also shows that it was more of a move, a shift. It wasn't really just they disappeared. In other words, a lot of those jobs were offset by increased, higher than normal jobs in the southern areas. And it also turns out that those southern areas had less of a union concentration So maybe that had something to do with it. And there is actually good evidence for that, but I think that that's just like, you have politicians who need a narrative and to get more votes and to get what they want and to get their win. They're not going to just tell you how great everything is. They're going to focus on what they need to fix and how they have the right idea to fix it. So they find things that are wrong. And for whatever reason, this stuff started resonating now again. But really and truly, if you look at, say, Ross Perot, Pat Buchanan, all through that, even just through that time period, it isn't that stuff didn't resonate. Even Lyndon LaRouche, it did resonate. Ross Perot split an election and probably helped Bill Clinton win. Pat Buchanan, it's not that he never raised any money and never had any following. So I think there's always some tendency to believe some of these things, and it might be the case that a lot of the people that we see vote for, say, a J.D. Vance or a Donald Trump, maybe they don't believe all of these things. Maybe they believe some of these things. And maybe they have one issue that really resonates with them. And maybe what we're doing, we collectively outside of that circle, maybe what we're doing is we're attributing a little bit too much to what we think all those voters think. I did a talk today for an Ivy League school, students from an Ivy League school. A little bit of irony there. Anyway, a couple of the students asked questions along these lines here and said, well, we know, that everybody's been struggling so much in the middle class. And it's like, okay, well, what do you have? Where does that come from? And so it's pervasive. I wish I had a better explanation, but it is certainly out there and it can certainly be frustrating, but I won't give up by just trying to sort of, push back with data and say, well, actually, you can see this. You can see that's not quite right if you look at this. And I'll just keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, we can all stand there, shake our fists, and say, those kids these days.
Yeah.
Just like our parents did at us.
Yeah.
But it's also what's interesting is it's not just that this generation is better off than previous generations here in America. Globally, it's true. Our colleagues down the street at the Brookings Institution in 2018 did a study that showed for the first time in 30,000 years since agrarian-based civilization began, in 2018, there were more people in the world who were middle class or rich than there were people who were poor or on the verge of poverty, right? And that trend started in 1990, right? What happened in 1990? Socialism collapsed around the world, right? And China adopted, it's crony capitalism, but capitalism, right? Authoritarian capitalism. India turned away from socialism. Billions of people in Africa and across the world have been lifted out of poverty into the middle class and what globally would count as wealthy. And I would venture to say that maybe 1% of Americans or some small fraction wouldn't count among the global top 1%. In terms of this country. And yet what we're seeing is, and so it was classical liberal ideas, economic philosophy that lifted all these people out of poverty. And what are we seeing? Young people want socialism. They're all of a sudden they like socialism. On the right, you have the post-libs who are saying, this free enterprise stuff is bad. And so capitalism is under assault from the right and the left right now, which is what has created the best living conditions of any generation in human history, both in the United States and across the world. What the hell is going on?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I think that is. I mean,
that's why we have you on to tell us.
we're about to kill the goose that laid the golden egg.
Exactly.
Here, it's really dangerous, and this is the thing that I think when somebody says what's going on in this, I do have. This isn't good. But this is my story here, because I used to work at the Heritage Foundation, and a lot of people are looking around and saying, "Well, what's going on with the Heritage Foundation?" It's like they're eschewing free markets. They're like, "Well, no, we're not so free market anymore, right? We're not so free trade anymore." Well, even there, for a very long time, there were many people, many conservatives, quote unquote conservatives. Some working at the Heritage Foundation, but all involved in some way in that movement, who believe all of these things, that we need limiting principles on markets. We need to restrain markets. We need to restrain free trade. We need to restrain morality in some way. All these things, right? They would never. My frustration with them was that they would rarely come out and say what those limiting principles would be and where we should draw the line, and nobody could ever figure that out. But the point is, there were already lots of those people there. And I think that, some of this is just a combination of more recent frustrations and some of that same sort of latent feeling and that latent sort of distrust or mistrust of, too much freedom, whatever that might be. And so I'm hesitant to say that it's just one thing happening, as much as it is sort of just like these things happening at the right time or the wrong time, I guess. But
Norbert,
some of it is political. Some of it is political
Right.
opportunism. I
And
definitely
cynicism.
believe that.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that is completely true, and I think your analogies to William Jennings Bryan and Pat Buchanan and to a certain extent even the sort of Father Coughlin types really resonant. But I mean, there are real structural changes in our society. The ultra rich are ultra rich. We've never had somebody as rich as Elon Musk. The other thing is the thing that our colleague Nick Eberstadt writes about, which is this remarkable decision. And I think in many cases it is actually a decision on the part of men, in particular in recent years, white men, not to work. Just, he wrote two great books, an updated version of the other called Men Without Work, about this cohort of people who basically have stopped working. And I suspect that there's very substantial overlap between them and, downtrodden towns where opioid usage and suicide are very prevalent. But there are structural changes like that in society. Or do I not know what I'm talking about? And am I just spouting stuff because I work with people who are smarter
No.
than me?
No. I mean, I am familiar with that book, with Nick's book, and I'm familiar with that depths of despair sort of thing from Angus Deaton and all that. And there's superficially there's stuff there, but I think if you dig deeper, that stuff doesn't really hold up. Again, you've got a much more highly educated workforce, and if you look at working age males, you have to cut the data even harder to find that they haven't done well. And in terms of the people out of the workforce, the males out of the workforce as well, you've also got to remember that women came into the workforce in enormous numbers compared to where they were. So there's been a shift in the family, and the shift in the family is important. And on top of all that, you have a growing social sort of safety net, and there is a lot of work by Casey Mulligan, is just one person that I can name, who has looked at the increase in disability payments and the increase in disability eligibility. So it becomes much easier to get disability payments. It becomes easier to retire earlier as you get wealthier. All of these things contribute to a lot of those guys, men, coming out of the workforce. And when you adjust for all of that stuff, it's really not an incredibly prizing phenomenon, and it's not necessarily a problem. Now, that doesn't. I'm not saying that opioid use is good, but there's a whole bunch of things going on there, and I think it's really, really risky and dicey to attribute any of that workforce stuff to just that one thing, just the opioid use or just the despair or whatever that might be.
I got two exit questions. One is I just want to take on what Danny was saying about inequality and sort of that we've never had somebody as rich as Elon Musk, and that's true. But so if the average American, worker is 45% wealthier, and so is the average, tech person, let's say, right? Our incomes both go up by 45%. We're both better off, but inequality has increased. like the fact that Elon is doing so well
Right.
probably means a lot of people who work for Elon are doing really
Right.
well, right?
That's right.
And
No,
and
that's
so
right.
so if everybody's income is going up, who the hell cares if they're more billionaires?
Right.
Why should that be
Yeah.
a why does inequality even matter?
I don't think it does. I think I think in the objective sense of the term and the way it's being used, I think it's a mistake, and I think it does not matter and should not matter. Now, whether human jealousy or some
But we've never
emotion
been
like
like that
that.
as a country.
I'm sorry.
We've never been like that as a country, where
No,
we,
and
where we've been jealous of the wealthy.
Yeah.
We all looked at them and said, we want to be like that. Let's work hard and get there, right?
Yeah, I think that's Trump's appeal, initial appeal, right? Is that he was the successful guy in New York, right?
Yep.
So I don't know. I'm not sure that stuff will resonate long term as much as maybe some of the other stuff, but I guess we'll have to see. It shouldn't, because people should soon realize how much better they are, within that context. I don't know though. I don't know.
And then my last exit question is, and I promise this is the last one. If you could be a 20-something at any point in human history from the dawn of agricultural civilization to today, if you didn't choose to be an American 20-something in 2025, would you be insane?
Would I be insane?
Yeah, would you be insane not to
Yes.
choose now
Yes.
as the best time to live and
Yes,
be
absolutely.
20-something?
No, hands down. It would be absolutely crazy.
I mean, even
Hands
20
down.
years ago, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, you take any one of those 5 decades going back. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I agree with you. George Will had a great column. I'm going to talk about it in the intro. But, he about 8 years ago, he did this column. He says that if you're living today, you are richer than John D. Rockefeller.
That's right.
In the quality of your life. Like John D. Rockefeller had a home beautiful home in California and a beautiful mansion on Fifth Avenue, but he had a private train car, but he had to take a train across the country
right.
without air conditioning, and
Right.
and he had no antibiotics. And he
That's
had
right.
no, there was no radio. And there was, if he wanted to get, order out Thai food, there was no Thai food. And you'd have to pick up the phone and call the operator and have her try and find out like where there was a restaurant. I mean, just all the things that we just take for granted today
We
as
do. No,
life
we do.
conveniences would have been our luxuries that he could have never even imagined. So, the idea that, I would rather be living a 20-something graduating from college, living with 4 roommates and my iPhone and my Netflix and my healthcare and my antibiotics than John D. Rockefeller, dying in his mansion on Fifth Avenue in 1916.
I'm with
Yes.
you. I'm with you, Mark.
So
I'll take it.
quick exit question from me, which is, okay, we have been through this before and we came out of it. What causes that? Do you have any sense of how to pervert Irving Kristol's expression, how Gen Z types who are anxious and depressed actually come out of that sense and recognize and are smacked in the face with reality?
Yeah. This one, I've probably got. I probably have the less of an answer for this one than any of the other stuff we talked about. I don't know. I vacillate between just being optimistic that reality, sets in and they get jobs and they see it and they feel it and they just, sort of spin around a little bit and then come back, to the fold. And then in other times I don't know. I don't know if it's working or not. I don't know. I like to think that ultimately the success will kind of take care of itself, so to speak, but I don't know. The only hope that I have, though, is this is the only good piece of the answer that I can give you. Like I said, I mentioned I had a 20-something-year-old son, and, his friends are over and we talk about his friends and his group, his peer group. None of them care about any of this stuff. I think like to attribute the sort of like movement, this sort of like populist movement of restricting trade and restricting globalization and clamping down on all the things that have made us so prosperous, it's not even something that they that they think about. It's like it's an afterthought for them, and at some point they'll have to deal with that. But I think that they're still too young and well off. Many of them are still too young and well off to truly have to deal with that stuff. So it could go
Well,
either way.
let's hope they're smacked in the face with reality. Thank you, Norbert. This was great, and for once, a reasonably cheerful podcast for me and Mark, which is I think for once is probably actually the right expression here, because it's so rare that we're like, no,
The
reality is
actual
actually much
situation
better.
is better than people think.
Yes.
That's
So
not
thank
usually our
you for
theme.
that.
You're
As we
welcome. Well,
reach
I
the
hope it was.
holidays, it's good to be optimistic and positive that actually our lives are better than they ever have been, and that goes for young people as well. So thank you for that dose of happy reality, and take care. Happy holidays.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so Danny, what do you think?
So I think it's really important that we think about the politics of this, because really it's not just this perception. It's not just young people thinking this. It's not just the fact that there's there's generational angst. It's also that we are in this period where politicians are really exploiting the idea that life sucks for everybody. And, Donald Trump's first inaugural really hit that one out of the park. Even though I think personally he's not a pessimist, he nonetheless sort of harps on this narrative of, the forgotten man, the downtrodden man, how people have been exploited and taken advantage of. And funnily enough, I think, Bernie Sanders and everybody else really is exactly the same. And we're not in a Reaganite period of mourning in America, and we need that because actually the facts support it.
Well, there are forgotten Americans, and there are people who are struggling, and I don't think when we look at the overall numbers, is where we don't want to pretend that that's not happening. And one of the I am a classical liberal, right? I believe in free trade, I believe in free enterprise, and all the rest of it. But I believe in free trade and free enterprise that's tempered by a few things. I feel it's tempered by foreign policy considerations, right? So maybe making stuff in China is economically makes more sense, but it might not make national security sense to do that, and it might not it might not be smart to have all of our pharmaceuticals coming from China, even though that's cheaper. The unfettered free market isn't the answer to everything, and as it's true that there's been no, you can argue, for example, there's no net job loss in America as a result of a lot of the free trade. There's net job loss in Lordstown. There's net job loss in certain communities, and that in a democracy, your free enterprise has to be tempered by freedom, right? By democratic choices. And we have people. If a bunch of people stand up and say this isn't working for me, then we have to listen to them, and we have to adjust our policies to do that. So it's not like there's no problem. I don't want to leave this podcast thinking there's no problems in America. Student debt is a huge problem, as you raised, right? But maybe part of the problem with student debt is like you shouldn't take out $500,000 in debt to get a degree in underwater basket weaving. Maybe our old boss Arthur Brooks, he went to correspondence school and got famously his 5K BA. People have to make better choices, but we do have to deal with some of the impacts. And there's healthcare is hard to get for some people, and it used to come with your job, and now does. So there are issues that have to be addressed, but to wholesale, my problem is with wholesale saying the world is much worse now than it was a long time ago, and it's unrecoverable, and the only way to do it is to throw away free enterprise and embrace socialism. And you've got people on the right who want to embrace big government too. So it's like this I'm from the government, I'm here to help is coming from both the left and the right today, and it's a problem.
It is, but I think there is an additional problem, and I agree with you. Look, we've talked about this many times, and in fact, we name checked Angus Deaton, and who wrote about Deaths of Despair, and we had him on the podcast talking about this. This is not, it's not imaginary, or at least let's put it this way: it's not entirely imaginary. But the reality is that especially, you talk about Lordstown. By the way, you always talk about Lordstown. It's like your Anytown, USA. Right. But
Like Peoria.
it is, yes, where you almost were. But again, this sense among people like my own children who really have it pretty darn good and have great prospects for the future, that they're never going to live the life that we live is really pretty untethered from reality. And it is offensive to see how the people who we hate, the people who Bernie Sanders is shepherding into the House of Representatives and into local politics, exploit that perception of misery and coast on it, when the reality is, as you said at the beginning, a lot of these kids are in fact are already or have the prospect of living a better life than John D. Rockefeller did 100 years ago.
Yep. And also, you don't have to live in Washington, D.C. or Manhattan to be successful in life. There's a beautiful country out there, which is they're much more affordable than those big cities. And, maybe if you want to live in those places, don't expect to live in a beautiful multi-bedroom place with granite counters and all the rest of it. You're gonna have to. You can live beautifully in Middle America, or you can live with a bunch of roommates until you get a permanent roommate and a spouse. And by the way, do that sooner, because two incomes are better than one, and two can live in the price of one. So that's the other thing we didn't get into, which is the collapse of marriage.
Right.
Because
Right.
if you look at all the
it's coming
statistics.
back.
If you look at all the statistics about wealth creation, the married couples are doing a lot better than single people are in terms of building their wealth, and better than previous generations. So advice is get married, live somewhere affordable, work hard, and build your life, and stop whining.
There you go. Words from Dad. Stop whining.
And get off my lawn.
Exactly.
I don't even have a lawn, but get off of it.
I do, and I want everybody off of it as well. So I'm with you on this one. Anyway, that was a great discussion, and I really I appreciate hearing good news sometimes. So I hope everybody else does in this upcoming holiday season. And take care. Thanks for being with us.
See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.